All right, this is from The Giver, Chapter 1, Lois Lowry. It was almost December, and Jonas was beginning to be frightened. No, wrong word, thought Jonas. Frightened meant that deep, sickening feeling of something terrible about to happen. Frightened was the way he had felt a year ago when an unidentified aircraft had overflown the community twice. He had seen it both times, squinting toward the sky. He had seen the sleek jet, almost a blur at its high speed, go past, and a second later heard the blast of sound that followed. Then one more time, a moment later, from the opposite direction, the same plane. At first, he had been only fascinated. He had never seen aircraft so close, for it was against the rules for pilots to fly over the community. Occasionally, when supplies were delivered by cargo planes to the landing field across the river, the children rode their bicycles to the riverbank and watched, intrigued. The unloading and then the takeoff directed to the west, always away from the community. But the aircraft a year ago had been different. It was not a squat, fat-bellied cargo plane, but a needle-nosed single-pilot jet. Jonas, looking around anxiously, had seen others, adults as well as children, stop what they were doing and wait, confused for an explanation of the frightening event. Then all of the citizens had been ordered to go into the nearest building and stay there immediately, the rasping voice through the speakers had said. Leave your bicycles where they are. All right, we're going to stop right there. Now, I'm going to do a teacher think aloud here. So I'm paying attention to the setting. I'm trying to make connections to what I know in my life and what's going on in this book. So what did I notice? Well, I noticed bicycles. I noticed they have planes, and we have planes. I noticed that there is a loudspeaker. So how is that like our world? Well, I ride bikes. I've been on and seen planes. And there's also he said that they weren't allowed to fly over the community. Normally planes weren't. And I know that's similar to our world. There's no fly zones in DC. After September 11th, people aren't allowed to fly over the Capitol building or the White House, without special authorization. But how is this unlike our world? Well, adults were confused about planes. That seems weird. The loudspeaker telling people what to do. So, that's weird, just out in the community, a loudspeaker coming on and just saying, do this immediately, do that. So that's unlike our world. And now I'm going to try to make sense of, well, what could this big idea be based on what I've read so far? Could be war, maybe, the planes, the speakers. It kind of reminds me of World War II and maybe in Great Britain when they were being bombed by the Germans. There were loudspeakers that told them to go into shelters immediately when their planes were coming from Nazi Germany. So maybe this is about war. I have no idea, but I'm starting to form an opinion about what this could be about right now. So we're going to continue. Let's see if that theory about my theme, my big idea, is going to pan out in this next section. Instantly, obediently, Jonas had dropped his bike on its side on the path behind his family's dwelling. He had run indoors and stayed there alone. His parents were both at work, and his little sister, Lily, was at the child care center where she spent her after-school hours. Looking through the front window, he had seen no people, none of the busy afternoon crew of street cleaners, landscape workers, and food delivery people who usually populated the community at that time of day. He saw only the abandoned bikes here and there on their sides. An upturned wheel on one was revolving slowly. He had been frightened then. The sense of his own community silent, waiting, had made his stomach churn. He had trembled. So we've only been, this is a flashback, if you guys didn't know. So he was thinking about, okay, well, I think I feel frightened. And then boom, we're instantly into a flashback. So all of the stuff that's happened so far, the plane flying over the community, this has been in the past. So, he's just remembering back to his feeling of being frightened. He said, I think I'm frightened. And then he remembers a time when he was frightened, and he says, he'd been frightened then, that sense of his own community silent, waiting, and made his stomach churn. He had trembled. Now we're in the present. But it had been nothing. Within minutes, the speaker had crackled again, and the voice, reassuring now and less urgent, had explained that the pilot in training had misread his navigational instructions and made a wrong turn. Desperately, the pilot had been trying to make his way back before his error was noticed. Remember, this is all the past too right now. So he's thinking about how he feels. He says, I was frightened when that plane flew over the community. And then we quickly went back to the present on that last slide where it said he had been frightened then, the sense of his own community. And then now we're back in the past, but it had been nothing, right? So just know that this whole first part is a flashback for the most part. Needless to say, he will be released, the voice had said, followed by silence. There was an ironic tone to the final message, as if the speaker found it amusing. And Jonas had smiled a little, though he knew what a grim statement it had been. For a contributing citizen to be released from the community was a final decision, a terrible punishment, an overwhelming statement of failure. Even the children were scolded if they used the term lightly at play, jeering at a teammate who missed a catch or stumbled in a race. Jonas had done it once. He had shouted at his best friend, "That's it, Asher, you're released," when Asher's clumsy error had lost the match for his team. He had been taken aside for a brief and serious talk by the coach, had hung his head with guilt and embarrassment, and apologized to Asher after the game. Now, thinking about the feeling of fear as he pedaled home along the river path, he remembered that moment of palpable, stomach-sinking terror when the aircraft had streaked above. So we're in a flashback within a flashback when he yelled at his friend and he got in trouble. And now we're back to the present, where it starts now thinking about that feeling of fear as he pedaled home along the river. So that starts the present. So there's a lot of stuff happening here within the first couple of pages. It was not what he was feeling now with December approaching. He searched for the right word to describe his own feeling. Jonas was careful about language. Not like his friend Asher, who talked too fast and mixed things up, scrambling words and phrases until they were barely recognizable and often very funny. Jonas grinned, remembering the morning that Asher had dashed into the classroom, late as usual, arriving breathlessly in the middle of the chanting of the morning anthem. When the class took their seats at the conclusion of the patriotic hymn, Asher remained standing to make his public apology as was required. Boom, we're in another flashback, right? "I apologize for inconveniencing my learning community." Asher ran through the standard apology phrase rapidly, still catching his breath. The instructor and class waited patiently for his explanation. The students had all been grinning because they had listened to Asher's explanation so many times before. All right, we're going to stop right there.